disappear in approximately 5 minutes time. So before I go and introduce formally, well, actually, let's introduce Joshua and Adriana first, and then I'll come across to Ollie if he has any resounding comments he wants to leave us with before he needs to disappear. So Joshua, do you want to come off mute and just introduce yourself to everybody? And then Adriana, if you want to do the same, then we'll go to Ollie, and then I'll come back to Joshua for your thoughts on this session that we've just sat through, and then I'll go to Adriana. So Ollie, any final thoughts before we say goodbye to you?
Well, look, Sarah, thanks a lot. It's been fantastic and really, really insightful and enriching for me. So I really appreciate all the participants. I think what struck me about today's discussion is that one, obviously, given the nature of my work, I think what's clear is that, and listening to a lot of the speakers, particularly what Rachel said and others, but that granular detail about what's actually happening on the ground can't be overlooked. I think there's a risk that we can become too arm's length from the detail of what's happening. And actually, there may have been, although sustainability was less integrated 10 years ago, I think it perhaps was more local and more focused on what was actually happening on the ground. And there's a risk that can be lost in what's happening at the moment. But I think the other thing that struck me really clearly is that the wealth of expertise and knowledge and specialist skill sets that have been demonstrated today, I think that is not necessarily translated and connected to the capital markets that fund projects and think about projects. I'm not sure whether I've developed this into a recommendation, but it strikes me that the people I interact with, particularly on the capital market side, who are thinking about financing mining projects and metals more generally, they don't know nearly as much as what's, they're just not in a position to be as informed as they could be. So thinking through ways in which that can become the kind of knowledge that's been shared today can be translated into that sector of the economy, I think is really key. As I say, I haven't really thought through how that might work, but it seems such an obvious point. But yeah, as I said, it's been really fascinating to listen to everyone. So thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Ollie. Let's give him all a round of applause, because he needs to disappear off and speak to some of those lovely clients and maybe inform them, which would be great.
Indeed. Yeah, I'll try. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ollie. Great. Joshua, let's come to yourself. Do you want to introduce yourself and then maybe feed in your thoughts, that kind of just resounding themes from this morning, and then we'll go to Adriana.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here. So I'm Josh. I'm currently a Knowledge Exchange Fellow at the University of Exeter for the People and Mining Network, which I might plug quickly at some point. While this role is pretty new to me, I guess my interest in mining reaches back a good few years, almost a decade. I've been kind of stumbling across Gavin Hilson's master's course. If anyone's spoken to him before, I think you'll know his enthusiasm for change in the mining industry. It's hard to resist, and I've had the privilege of doing fieldwork and traveling across sub-Saharan Africa, mainly Malawi, exploring the social perceptions of artisanal and small-scale mining as part of the PhD that's slowly coming together. And I'd agree with what Rachel said, or at least for me personally, that nothing beat seeing things for myself. It was only really going there that made it real for me. I'll quickly just plug People and Mining so we get that out of the way. And so People and Mining is currently an online space hosting panel discussions and workshops that bring together diverse people and share an interest in the intersections between mining and people. So I imagine everybody here, which is great. And it's just a huge range of backgrounds, whether it's geology, social science, mining, politics, and across industries as well, like academia, and as well as academia and policy. Well, we don't have policymakers at the moment, we'd like to, but development NGOs is certainly part of the group. And we're just hoping to widen conversations. Basically, just covering what everyone said here. I feel like I'm just repeating myself, which is, I guess, great in some way that we're all on the same page. But we're just looking to like break down these traditional boundaries that exist, whether it's disciplinary or professional, and try and learn from one another and network a bit and take these opportunities to improve. It's very similar to what Raw Responsible Materials wants to do, and many others here. Because there's this wealth of expertise already available, and a lot of it is just translating across these boundaries. I think Lorraine mentioned earlier about all these different words that kind of mean the same thing. I feel that exists not just in acronyms, but across these disciplines. So we've had a good first year. We're all pretty new. Recently had a 2-day low to no cost workshop with All Deposits Hub and Social Practice Forum, kind of helping educate on community communication for exploration geologists. I hope that feeds into a bit of the spiel I just gave you about bridging these boundaries. And we're just looking forward to the next year and more projects, more workshops, and we'd love to hear from anyone that's interested. So rounding up what's just been said, that's a tough one. I've got like a plethora of notes in front of me, and it's trying to work out what to capture. But I guess for me, the overarching message is things are changing and there's a real drive for change. But to have this change, there's going to be a real need for collaboration. And that's what's so great, I think, about this panel and how it's been sculpted together. You have people from such different backgrounds, whether that's engaged in politics, journalism, social experts, people in business and finance. I think we all kind of have the same similarities at heart. It's like it sounds like a real emotional drive, and I'm so glad that emotion's been raised so much as an element of this. Like, not only, I guess there's the emotional response from the public about these activities, but also like the reasons that we engage in this, like our emotional drive to want change, especially having like seen things and how bad the mining industry can potentially be and how positive we believe it can be. So I think for me that, it just really reinforces this need to collaborate however we can. And I'd love just to pick apart all these different notes. I love Jeff's little point on every day is a learning day in this space, and kind of about staying humble. And then you had the promotion of young voices by Alison and Wendy, followed kind of straight away by the promotion of the elderly voices. It's just unraveling this complexity and realizing that everyone has a say and everyone's say is important, and that we need to stay open to it. At least I know I need to stay more open to it. It's something that I definitely struggle with at times, getting a tunnel vision. Maybe I leave it there for now. Hope it didn't rattle on too long.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Josh. Great. Adriana, do you want to come on and introduce yourself and maybe give us some points? And Carly, I know that you need to disappear, so feel free to drop off, or if you can hang on I'll come to you next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana. I am a sustainability analyst. I work for Minviro. So Minviro, for those who doesn't know, it's a mining consultancy company and also technology development focused on life cycle assessment. And we are based in London. So what we basically do is quantify the environmental impacts of mining companies as well as battery manufacturers. So we help them target the environmental hotspots within their process and within supply chains. So first of all, I would like to congratulate all the speakers for such compelling presentations. I think all of these presentations we've been hearing this morning has been like really reached the point of the whole conference. So looking at what is the just transition of mining and whether we are on the right track to unblock this just transition. So just to share my thoughts with the panel and with the whole audience, is like, well, first of all, I'm going to give my personal view from the point of view of the environmental and the social aspect, since it's more what I'm more experienced with. But also, I don't want to neglect all the economic and other social and political aspects which I am aware exist. So I really enjoyed the presentation from Lorraine. So it was really inspirational. And this gave me a lot of food for thought. Like, are we on the right track? Because sometimes what we think is is the mining industry still lagging behind, for example, in terms of these Mine 4.0 or in terms of even sustainability? Because we hear a lot of ESG. We know we are going to be discussing that this afternoon. We are discussing a lot about sustainability, but what is this really? When we read, for example, sustainability reports, we sometimes come across funny numbers, complex numbers that we don't understand. So from my point of view, in order to evaluate the environmental impacts of the mining sector and mining processes, we have to consider and evaluate everything from a whole perspective. We need to see the whole picture. And I think this is something Oliver mentioned in his presentation. We have to consider upstream processes as well as downstream processes. And this is, in my opinion, what is going to allow you to make informed decisions in order to make strategies. For example, in terms of supply chains, we've discussed this today, and we've discussed that also in previous sessions in the conference. So how I see that is that we have to follow 4 steps in order to unblock this just transition of the mining sector, which begins to looking at the whole picture. The whole pictures in terms of social aspects, in terms of environmental aspects, and all the other factors. And again, we have to think about what data we have available. So I'm a sustainability analyst. I work with data, and I know environmental aspects can be fairly easy quantified and put it into an impact category. For example, that's what we do in life cycle assessments. But what about life cycle assessments of the social aspect? That is more tricky because the data we have available for that tends to be more in the qualitative side of things. So this is something about the ESG ratings and why people are not so keen into that, or if they have mixed feelings about that. The third step, how I envision that, would be the step of making informed decisions and also following the strategy that you want to achieve with that in order to decarbonize your supply chains, which in turn will decarbonize the economy. That's what we are all aiming at. And the last step, which I believe is the most complicated, maybe the panel members agree with me, is how you communicate that information. I mentioned early on that sometimes you just stumble with funny numbers, really complex, and you don't know how to interpret that. So I think something we have to vouch for is how we present that data so that everyone can understand it, no matter if this person belongs to the mining sector or has no idea about that. So this is some of the key takeaways I've taken from today's session. And yeah, I'm looking forward to discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Adriana. Carly's unfortunately had to drop off, but Jeff, I'm going to come to you first. Any just general reflections from the session that we've been through, and then Rachel, I'll come to yourself.
I guess I kind of have, there's so many thoughts and so many good opportunities. My initial thinking was that we're all pushing in the same direction, but there seems to be a disconnect somewhere between the data that we have and the action that's taken. So if we take the DADA principle, data, analyze, decision, action, there seems to be a disconnect between those who are making the decision and the analysis that they're provided with. And so how do we get that wider socioeconomic analysis into the decision-making process? Whether that be in a company, whether that be in into politics, whatever it may be. And I guess where I'm at the moment is I'm trying to think, how do you do that? How do you break that down? How do you bring that alternative analysis to the data that's present into that higher, predominantly economic focused decision making?
So do you think, building on what Rich was saying, Jeff, that gap between what's actually going on and then what the capital markets are actually using to make their decision, is that one of those gaps you're pointing at? Yes,
I think so. But everyone has their own objectives, right? So in the crudest possible sense, if you're in investments, your job is to get the highest ROI as you possibly can without destroying your company. And you have investors to keep on side. And if you're in a company, you've got shareholders to keep on side. And most people are happy when they've got money in their pocket, especially the way things are going at the moment. So everyone has their own objectives. How do we get, and whilst we all want to see a better world and we all want to see ESG part of that, how do we make sure that everyone is aligned to the same ESG objectives and principles? That's the disconnect. And that's where I think, sessions like this and wider sessions on that collaboration and sharing the right narrative and using the right discourse, the right language, because I think if we can unify that language and get that into a wider audience, that might be part of the solution.
Great, thanks for that, Jeff. Rachel, what do you think? And Lorraine, if you're there, feel free to join us in the discussion by turning your video on. If not, we won't bother you. It's all good. Rachel, what do you think?
Lots of thoughts swirling. I think it's always interesting to have such a variety of perspectives coming together, and just realizing that there's just so much to take into account. And I think sometimes I find that a little bit mind-blowing of there's so many considerations. I talk passionately about my little space, but everybody has their space. And again, so I think, what has repeatedly come through the discussions is discussion. In order to be able to address that, one individual person will be overwhelmed by implementing it. So it takes a team, it takes all the competencies to come together and kind of thrash it out so that we get somewhere. I think that's my first thought. My second thought, I continue struggling with it. It's this whole finance thing. It's that, just saying, if we do your ESG thing, our project will not be financially viable. Well, I query that. Should the project actually go through if the social aspect is not taken into account? But then they'll say, but then people won't live. And so, the discussion kind of goes round in circles. And so I'm still trying to get my way out of that circle, because part of me thinks there's something wrong with that logic.
I think you've got a lot of nodding going on in regards to that one, Rachel. Yeah. So, if you haven't taken the social aspects into account, and when you do, you suddenly realize that it's not economic, or you're going to lose money, that's not a project. Or it is a project, but it's not perhaps the project that your shareholders who initially signed up were perhaps buying into. Lorraine, what are your thoughts?
I need to tell Rachel, I was so glad to hear you tell it like it is. I went to a workshop recently on presentation skills, and we were told right at the beginning, split your audience, be controversial, and immediately you'll know who's on your side, who's not on your side, might as well go home or switch off. And in my field, which is also quite niche, as I said, indirect procurement is your office supplies. The whole way through your company, you're spending money, and the whole way through, you need to think of a just transition. It's not about closing down a coal mine and starting to build wind turbines. That's impossible. It's to look at absolutely everything the whole way through. Yeah, so, I loved it. I learned so much. And my son's best friend works for Anglo. And to hear the incredible work they're doing, it's just so encouraging after all these years. So thank you, Sarah. It was a brilliant, brilliant event. Well done.
Oh, thank you very much, Lorraine. That means a huge amount. Thank you. And yeah, I think this is something where, so I used to work for Anglo American. So when lots of people say, okay, we used to work together, etc., that's a link there. And that was something where being part of initially the geology team. So I was in exploration, and then I worked in geology on site, and then I was very much in the sustainability side of things. And then I went into risk management. And the reason I went into risk management, because it sounds so boring. Why? Why would anybody want to spend their lives filling out those Excel spreadsheets with all of those things that might go wrong? Well, of course, luckily, that's not what risk management is all about, which is brilliant. But the reason that I did it was because I thought, okay, even in this company where actually sustainability is a big part of the culture of the organization. Is it always taken into account with all of those big decisions? And I think the honest answer was sometimes yes, sometimes no. Whereas if you can get it in through, say, that integrated risk management avenue, you can then say, you know, to Rachel's point, okay, we can either make money or we can have some social development. How do we balance this so that we get that sweet spot? And if that sweet spot doesn't exist, perhaps this isn't a project, and we need to be prepared for that. So I very much agree with you know, kind of very much what you guys are saying there. Jeff, just coming back to yourself with regards to government, and the change that we're seeing in Westminster, etc., at this precise second in time. Do you think that they are beginning to see the magnitude of the complexity of what we're looking at here? Do you think that's beginning to come through, or they're still trying to go, hang on a second, we're in this bit of the cycle, we therefore need to work out what this mineral strategy is by that date, otherwise we've kind of missed that ever turning calendar?
I think 2 years ago, the government didn't look at supply chains. And if you speak to the MOD or you speak to BEIS, the supply chain to them is 2 stages back. And so that fundamentally misunderstood what we're trying to deal with. In Westminster, yes, it has changed. There is you've got BEIS, DIT, Cabinet Office, all pushing in the same direction, FCDO, all now looking at critical minerals and how do you develop a critical mineral strategy, including the entirety of the supply chain, because without that, saying you're going to become the Saudi Arabia of wind suddenly looks like a bold statement without any foundation. Floating wind, perhaps. Anyway, so there is a fundamental change. I would say that the cycle has gone out the window. They are just chasing some kind of strategy because, and COVID plus the ever increasing bipolarization of geopolitics plus Ukraine has demonstrated that actually we are seeing the world being stretched. We are seeing collaborations between partner nations, but ultimately we're in a race against them as well. We're in a race against America, we're in a race against Europe. And so I think the penny has dropped, and they are now understanding that actually, you know, you can build a car anywhere, but they'll go to necessarily where the supply chain is. And so everyone is slightly, yes, it's a rush now. And what we have to make sure is that that rushed decision is not incorrect. So that the rushed data and analysis doesn't lead to the wrong decisions and actions later on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. A message has just come in, which I think is absolute genius. And it's from Ludovine, and it says, information has no value. The use of it does. So using that information, which then comes to Lorraine's point of the purchasing managers in all of those organizations, the power that they have to get it right is just huge. And in previous years, we've spoken to people who they spend their lives in responsible procurement, etc. But Lorraine, I don't know if you want to talk to your point a little bit more, because I totally agree with you.
I think that, yeah, that's true. You know, I mean, everything's got to get bought. Everything comes into a company and goes out. So where it comes from, what you do with it, and where it finally ends up, the procurement and supply chain manager can control all of that. And what I used to do, I did all the procurement for 82 hotels. And I wanted green long before anyone knew what I was talking about. I would just not give someone the contract. They say, oh, we're not going to do this, it's going to be to us. I say, well, I'm terribly sorry. It's going to go to Mr. So-and-so. And then another workshop I'm running at the moment is the risks for supply chain managers as impacted by climate change. I mean, the pictures are horrifying. Roads are washing away along the coast. Look at those containers floating in a river in KwaZulu. It's floating. They're full of stuff, and they're floating in a flood. All this, the fires that burn at the tar that's melting. You know, and they're not ready. As I kept saying in my talk, it's all really well talking about mitigation and ESG and all this stuff. We've actually got to prepare and adapt. We've got to start now if we want to survive. and make changes now and know what they're going to be.
Mm.
Yeah, so we could talk till
We
midnight.
we could indeed, but don't worry, we're going to wrap it up very shortly. So actually, I was going to come back to Josh. So any further thoughts that you want to throw into the mix with regards to this final wrap up panel session? I think what I'm hearing here is the kind of, and it's fascinating, out of each session, there's a slightly different theme that emerges. And I think that for me, this one is all about the flow of information, the flow of knowledge, making sure you've got the diverse perspectives in the room, and then act on it. Actually use it. Don't just go, tick, I have collected that information in. Actually use it and make those decisions count. So I think that's perhaps one of the themes that I'm feeling coming out of this. Josh, what do you think? And then we'll go to Adriana.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's I think for me, what's stand out in the thoughts, I guess, before stepping into the panel was I was thinking about what the just transition meant for me, and then also thinking about what actually came before that. I didn't, when I first heard the term, it wasn't really a thought. Maybe it was, but there was definitely quite a lot of like emotion behind it as well. Or you look at it on paper and it can be, yeah, very inspiring to see like all these social elements now being included and this real push towards livelihood, and there's pragmatic plans being outlaid. It's still quite an abstract term for me as someone that can delve into it. And that's probably going to be the case for many people. And I have a bit of an apprehension to new buzzwords or phrases, maybe more than some people. This kind of inner pessimist might shout like more rhetoric and what about reality? And it comes back to what Rachel says, like, what about, what was it, walking the talk? And yeah, it's a very emotional response, I think, based on a legacy of, yeah, some poor potential policy decisions and interventions. There does seem to be this like growing pessimism and skepticism in society against leaders and institutions, particularly amongst the young. And I think that Jamie earlier in the week, who's a very switched on 19-year-old, kind of alluded to that. And James, sorry, not Jamie, it's my bad.
Yeah.
I just like, why is this important, I guess, is because I think it's hard to talk about the just transition, especially to do with mining, without having this emotional response. It's so deeply embedded with these emotions of destruction and pollution and exploitation. And while we might be moving away from it, that's where we are, and it's not where most people are going to be. It's basically, in paper, for most people, I think, the opposite of a clean, sustainable activity, whereas we're pushing it as a real enabler here. So yeah, it's this, I'm not too sure exactly what the issue is, but if it is this mistrust, maybe it is building this trust, and that's where we can really kind of have some kind of impact. We need to speak to these emotional underpinnings that people are going, leaning towards. And for me, those take a lot longer to unpick than the rational thought. And it's actually a much harder area for me to explore. And that might just be me. I think I probably speak to what a lot of men, at least in my generation, and maybe younger, that I've been exposed to. So yeah, I hope that, I don't know, maybe we should have to prepare to step into these more hostile audiences and be prepared to step into their shoes, rather than just trying to get them to step into our shoes, meeting people where they are, rather than where we want them to be. And that might be in the 70s, or it could be in the 90s. I don't know why I'm using time here, but maybe it's generational, and maybe it's not, everyone's going to be different, especially throughout cultures. So I think for me, it's going to be about open and honest exchange. And that starts within these groups, these panels, with each other. And hopefully, yeah, we can build trust with each other, and we can collaborate, and that can spread out. And yeah, it sounds tough, but I do take hope from it. I think for me, while there might be this like little inner pessimist that pops up sometimes when I hear of these brand new plans, it's really inspiring to just hear all the new ways of thinking and doing that seem to be far-fetched. Even like a few years ago, like the concept of Rockchain, or even having a panel that's talking very open about emotions, it feels fantastic. I just hope, yeah, that we can take small steps with each other to work on ourselves as well as working on the industry, and just keep having these conversations, and where we can be wrong. And hopefully this isn't just another domain to potentially, I guess, get attacked, because there's definitely an apprehension, I think, from a lot of people in the sector of not wanting to say like the wrong thing, when from what I hear in this panel is there's no real clear right, but we just have to try and feel it out and hold integrity in high regard. And yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Josh. And yeah, you know, recognizing that a lot of these subjects are incredibly emotional, and yet having really striving for that empathy and acknowledging that we need to respect as many of those different voices and perspectives as we possibly can and bring them into the discussion. So brilliant. Thank you very much, Josh. And yes, and go and take part in their discussions as well. So fantastic. Adriana, how about yourself? And then I'll go to Rachel.
Yeah, well, so coming back to your point that I really like about the power of data, how you do with the data, what you do with it in order to get value from it. I think this is also coming along with how the business model of the mining industry is developing, and how young experts are coming into the sector. So I really like what DPI Mining does, attracting research and development and new experts into the sector. So I think we have to revolutionize the way we think about the mining industry and how it goes about, even with the deal. I mean, how we deal with the data and in order to get value from it, as I mentioned before. So yeah, those are my 2 main points from the conference, and I was really happy to be able to share with you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adriana. Really good to have you part of it. Rachel, do you want to add anything? And then we'll go to Lorraine.
I don't know, I guess both Jeff and Josh sparked a little thing in me there. With Josh, I think, saying it's about emotion, while I agree with that, and you tend to have an emotional response, it kind of made my heart sink, because I thought no mining person is going to respond to emotion. And that's one of the main things I was told starting out, is that if you try and tell somebody that it's the right thing to do, or, you know, shouldn't we, whatever, you're just going to get laughed out of the room. And I think there's hard data behind what we're saying. I don't really think it's all about emotion, where there is an emotional response. You know, as Lorraine was saying, facts are containers are washing away, roads are washing away, communities are starving. Climate change is affecting the way people live and operate. So anyways, so I was just thinking, we need to present the facts. We need to present the hard data. It's not, I was once berated by one of my bosses for being emotional, and got quite frustrated, because I was actually, but I'm presenting you hard facts. I am telling you, you know, this is what is happening, this is the way, and this is where it's heading. Now, interestingly, 3 years later, he came back to me and said, I apologize. You are actually right. So anyways, so that's just, we need, if we want to go forward, we really need to have a case. We need to have hard evidence. We're dealing with engineers, statisticians, finance people, and they deal in numbers, they deal in facts, and they don't at all really deal with the emotional side. So I think that's the first thing. And the other one was, Jeff, and it's also a little query I have. I was kind of surprised recently to hear that for a company to be on the London Stock Exchange, the governance code is optional. And I was kind of, well, what do you mean it's optional? How is that possible? And so I was just thinking, you know, I really appreciate work being done in that space, because there's obviously still a lot to do. I was kind of just assuming that we'd already got to the stage where this was a non-negotiable.
I think Jeff's nodding. I'm not going to put him on the spot right this second. Lorraine, how about yourself? And then I will go to Jeff.
Just to say, you know, we've got to end off our talks with good news. I always do, which I couldn't do today. 20 minutes is far too short. There's a hope. I've been doing this for 50 years. I worked with the Environmental Protection Agency. They were brand new. And we were trying to understand why the trees were dying in LA. We called it acid rain. They didn't even know it was emissions from the cars in those days. Who was working on hemp? Wendy? We were on a huge big hemp product with the United Nations, and we built a hemp house in Cape Town. And government was supposed to build us facilities to turn the hemp into bricks, cabinetry, fabrics or whatever, and they never did. They let us down. So in fact, The friend who did it is suing the government, and he moved his farms up to Zambia. The other thing I was going to say is ESG, what worries me, the kind of thing that Rachel picks up and speaks up about, is that if you're looking at the whole product, you've got to look what they do with it at the end. Like if an agricultural chemical company is all over the place, I won't mention any names because it is so green, ESG, tick, 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 tick. Meanwhile, he's poisoning soil, rivers, the air, and the workers. His product is poisoning people. How can he claim ESG? Coca-Cola, same story. They have no intention of cutting back on plastic. They've just opened an enormous plastic factory in Tanzania and shut down a glass factory in Tanzania. Yeah, so I think that's why there was something else I wanted to say. When you can't remember, guys, it's about intelligence, nothing to do with old age. They're very clever people forget what they were going to say. So stay in touch with me. You are all wonderful, and I am so encouraged about what I've heard today. It's been really good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lorraine. Fantastic. And Jeff, any comments from yourself?
Oh, I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think it's great that there's so many people all pushing in the same direction, albeit from slightly different areas. And it's just sparked a thought in my mind, which, and maybe I'm well off, but this is from the discussion that we've just had. If you imagine a £5 note in your head, that can mean anything to anyone. Like to my daughter, that's the world, that's magazines and sweets and everything else. To someone else, that might be their lunch. You know, everyone's value of that £5 is different, albeit that the amount of money stays the same. And when we look at expenditure of money in a mining, in an extractive sector, you know, ESG often wouldn't be seen within that £5. I'm going to spend £5. That's OPEX, that's energy, that's plant profit. You know, we need to make sure that ESG is also seen. So when you look at that £5, it's not just all those things, it's also expenditure on ESG. How do we get to there? I don't know, but I'm hoping that finance will start to see the value of that £5, including ESG, which all of you do. So that's my thought.
That's brilliant, Jeff. And I think as well within that, you've got, the threats that you're kind of helping to prevent with part of that £5, but then actually the fact it's not just £5, it's actually £20. Because if you're spending it in the right way, that's what you're actually creating. Fantastic, cool. And I think that is a beautifully positive note to end this session on. So a massive thank you to all of our fantastic speakers here today. Big round of applause to all of you. Thank you so much.